handle on what. I mean, you know, in the Bronx we call it bait and switch. You know, it's very clear what's going on, and the whole purpose is to stave off definitive defeat until they're out of office. And you know what? It's not going to work. It's not going to work because there's going to be a Saigon, April 1975 exit from Iraq before these people are out of office. Remember where you heard it first. It's not a happy thing to predict. Well, one of the saddest things that I was forced to observe during my career at CIA was that we gradually gravitated from a culture where you told it like it was. You know, you spoke out without fear or favor, and where we had career protection for doing that, to a culture where political considerations started to impinge upon the objectivity of the analysis. And that began big time when Bill Casey came in as Ronald Reagan's director of the CIA. Now, he was a really smart fellow, and he was a great spy master for World War II, but the times had passed him by, and suffice it to say, he saw a Soviet under every rock. You know, he saw a Russian under every rock, and those analysts who said, "Oh, wait a second, Mr. Director, I see 2 Soviets there." Well, they became branch chiefs, and the ones that saw 3 became division chiefs. It was almost that bad. And the ones that would say, you know, "I don't see any there at all," or, you know, "This is really kind of propaganda spread by rightists in this particular country," they didn't get advanced at all. Many of them left. Robert Gates, who's now the Secretary of Defense, worked for me during the 70s as one of my analysts on the Middle East, actually. And he very quickly learned the way up in the agency, and by the time Casey came 10 years later, he was ready. And he became the head of analysis under Casey, and it was he and Casey that politicized analysis first and foremost on the Soviet Union. And that, of course, is why the CIA missed the fall of the Soviet Union. It just couldn't happen because these commies were commies forever. The party would never lose its place in the Soviet structure. And so even though analysts working there under these folks knew full well that Gorbachev, for example, was for real, that we really ought to pursue this glasnost, this perestroika, this whole opening of the Soviet system, they were prevented from saying so. Now, I left at about that time, as it was starting to get pretty bad. But what's the result of all that? Well, the way you politicize an institution like this is you get what I call malleable managers. Okay, you get people who are more interested in sniffing the prevailing winds from the White House or from the 7th floor, and you trim your analytical sails accordingly, okay? And there are far too many of those folks, and they, of course, got moved ahead and became the managers. And this is true in any bureaucracy, but it didn't happen to be true before that in the CIA. And what happened then, when the new president came in and kept George Tenet on and decided he wanted to make a war on Iraq, well, George Tenet was the beneficiary, if you can use that word, of a whole new culture of malleable managers who would salute no matter what they were told to do. So, for example, in the summer of 2002, months after the decision for war had already been made, there had been no national intelligence estimate. Now, national intelligence estimate is the kind of product, it's the supreme genre of intelligence analysis. It's always done before a key political decision in foreign affairs is made and implemented. On Vietnam, they would always ask for an estimate before they would start a new campaign of bombing or some new tactic. In this case, no estimate was requested by the White House, and no estimate was offered by George Tenet. Why? Because an honest estimate on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq would have said, Well, we know that 90% were destroyed right after the Gulf War. We have lists of other things, but we've never seen them. We've never seen them in satellite photography or intercepted communications. So we don't know if they exist, but they're on this list. And that would have been what would be served up, but that's not what the president wanted. And so it's better to do nothing than that. Well, when they decided to ask Congress to approve this war, and the Democrats, by the way, were in charge of the Senate at that point in time. But Bob Graham from Florida, who was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, he was kind of sleepy in one sense, and in another sense he was distracted because he wanted to run for president, so he let this sort of slip by. Dick Durbin, one of the people on the committee, said, hey Bob, they want us to vote for war, and we don't even have an estimate on whether there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, like they say, or if there are, whether they're a real danger to anybody. So don't you think we ought to ask for it? And I guess so. So he calls Tenet and he says, hey, how about an estimate on weapons of mass destruction? This is the middle of September 2002. And you know what Tenet says? He says, I'm sorry, Senator, but we're too busy. We're too busy doing other stuff. And Graham says, oh, okay, and hangs up. Durbin says, what did he say? He says, he's too busy. Man, that won't work. Call him back and say he's got to do it. Graham calls back, well, we really need one if you want us to vote for war. So what does Tenet do? Tenet says, well, okay, I'll check this out. He goes to the White House. He says, looks like we can't avoid this estimate any longer. What should I do? And the politicos there, I'm sure it was Karl Rove and Andy Card, and that whole quote could have been Cheney. Well, okay, you go back and do an estimate, but it's got to come out the way Dick Cheney said it was on the 26th of August, 2002.